Learn to improve conversions and generate more leads with the video podcast at marketingoptimization.tv.
Hi, and welcome to Marketing Optimization with Alexdesign. I'm your host, Alex Harris, and today we're chatting with Scott and Gunter. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Scott comes to us from usabilitysciences.com. To get started, what would be your definition of optimization and why is it beneficial?
In the context of a website, it's about ensuring that the visitor can successfully complete their task. Mm-hmm. And it's important because a lot of organizations really focus on satisfaction and loyalty and net promoter score and things like that. But from an optimization standpoint, we think you really have to start at determining whether they're successful or not, the very tactical sort of metric, because after visitors have more and more successful visits, that's where the more emotional metrics like satisfaction and loyalty come into play. So it's a very critical starting point for optimizing your website experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. As a designer, when I talk to potential clients or people on Clarity looking for advice, they put a website up and it looks good and it has good user experience, but they don't drill into those additional layers of understanding that customer mindset, really understanding how they're using the site properly. Can you give us a little bit of idea of really what is user experience testing and how do you get the best out of it?
Sure. So at the core, it's really evaluating the ease of use from your actual users or customers. And so and the benefit of that is, a lot of times, especially designers and developers, they try to internalize what they think the visitor wants to do and what they're capable of doing. And so it's always important to do that type of testing so that you're exposing designers, developers, stakeholders, executives, etc., to how users really think. It's really it really kind of overlaps voice of customer in that regard, and it's imperative in this day and age. Yeah,
a lot of people speak about that. We had a couple of interviews about it, and I don't think people grasp onto the voice of the customer enough. First of all, how do you understand their voice, and is there any specific methods that you go to gather that qualitative insight?
Sure. I mean, there are a lot of methods out there, as you mentioned. The most reliable and one that we've always relied on is the usability test. It's a great starting point. I often describe it as the Swiss Army knife. Because when we have clients that come in and they say, look, I don't know either who my visitor is, or I have all these questions about just overall assessment of the website experience, whether it's on desktop, mobile, et cetera. We tend to always start with the usability test because it's a great way to expose our clients and website owners, marketers, designers, et cetera, with how their users interact with their website, what they think about it. From there, I always tell our customers that, we're going to give you, or your customers, that is, are going to give you more things to do with your website than you can imagine doing over the next couple of years. So it's a really great starting point to drive kind of your overall strategies.
So you're going through and you're watching people go through the site, you're doing maybe some information architecture type of testing, user experience, try to get them to the right spot. And then from that, you're prioritizing maybe different experiments that you can come up with. Is there a procedure that you come through to take the data and then come up with a hypothesis?
Sure. So at the core of a usability test, it's a one-on-one session. We recruit targeted users in front of the computer, and we'll have them run through various tasks or scenarios that are indicative of what visitors are likely going to do when they come to the website. And as they do that, we encourage them to think out loud. And so that allows our research team to really try to understand where they're struggling, where they're happy with the experience, and then we probe as necessary to kind of understand what they're thinking as they visit the site. And that alone will start to expose things that run the gamut from very strategic sort of things like maybe pricing or policies, all the way through term low-hanging fruit, so more of design aspects or navigational flow, et cetera. And so you really kind of run the gamut of insights in doing that type of methodology. Ultimately, as a user experience researcher, we're going to be more focused on telling the clients and the customers from a user experience perspective, how big is this issue? Certainly, we don't know the business, that they're in. and we don't try to convince them that we do. And so our focus is always then on helping them understand based on their customer's viewpoint. And then ultimately it's up to them to decide what they can and can't do.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah, it's as you watch, you sit with people and you watch them go through and they express themselves. It's like almost an aha moment for learning about your website. You don't realize how much opportunity you may be missing until you go through that whole experience of sitting down with them, watching them, and then. Do you get enough data from going a one-by-one? How many people do you go through in order to get a good sample size?
We typically start at 8 users. 5 is enough. Right. And I think it is from a research perspective. It's usually not enough for our customers. But usually it depends on how many different sort of unique customer segmentations you have.
Right.
So for evaluating, let's say, a pharmaceutical website, then you're going to have a demographic that is doctors or caregivers, and you're going to have a demographic that's a patient. Well, you don't want to have 4 and 4, so you might have 8 and 8 or 6 and 6. And so certainly we start with 8, and then it goes up from there. And you have to remember, from a qualitative standpoint, things that are uncovered in this methodology, if it's broke, it's broke. You don't need 1,000 people to tell you that it's broke, right? I've used the example, and I can't remember where I heard this from, where if you're sitting in your office and you see somebody walk by and they trip on the rug outside, and you see the next person walk by and they trip, how many people do you have to see walk by and trip before you realize, hey, you know what, the rug's flipped up, right? So it's really, and anyone who observes the study, after about 3 or 4 users, we always joke that we need to have our observation room with padded walls. Because you get to where you start, our clients start coaching the user. It's right there. You're missing. You can see it right there. Just click on it, And so people learn very quickly in observing these type of studies. You don't need a lot of users to expose the big issues.
Yeah, that's a good point, because once you find those individual issues, then you can start to iterate. And that's what I want to kind of talk about now. After we've gathered all this information, now we want to start this iterative process of testing. Have you seen your clients do better from a bigger impact type of test than these small changes? I get that a lot of those questions a lot. Do I test for big impact? Do I test small changes at one time? Do you have kind of an opinion on your testing approach?
Yeah, we have, there's 2 points I want to make here. One is we have a methodology we call rapid iterative testing, right? Okay. So, and the way that works, it's obviously evaluating something in a design phase, whether that's a wireframe, clickable prototype, or somewhere in between. And what we do with that type of testing, it's another form of usability testing. But what we do is we test on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then on the off days, the design or development team will modify the prototype based on what we heard in the day before.
Wow.
And so what you now have is you have exploration, but you also have validation. And so it's a way for the team to understand, are they getting it right? Are they on the right track with what they're doing? And that's critical, because one of I think the biggest holes we have in our space, not just the research space, but even just and so forth, is the lack of testing that goes on the solution, right? There's a lot of companies that talk about doing research and evaluating what they have. More times than not, they don't evaluate the solution. And we see it far too often where they interpret the problem that we've exposed in research, then they go off and they make a solution and they've solved the wrong problem.
Interesting.
And they've really wasted a lot of time and effort, and they're still no better off, and the customer's no better off from the user experience perspective. And so that's still a missing piece in the market right now.
Well, it's a good point. I mean, business owners that they come to me and they want to improve their site, they don't realize how much work a lot of this stuff takes into account. Oh, can we just change this one thing and all of a sudden your conversions boom explode? More than likely it's not going to happen that way. If you have bugs on your site, that certainly could happen. But you made a great point. The rapid iterative testing. When you get some advice to try something, if you sit on that advice and don't experiment on it for days or weeks or months, it's basically wasted time. My most successful clients are the ones who either let me make changes quicker and test faster, or they do it themselves and they see results a lot faster. Because if you wait, things just don't happen. And, things are not going to come to you unless you purposely, intentionally increase your conversion.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's always, a website's a living, breathing thing, right? So on top of that, if you wait, not only are you missing potential opportunity there, but you're also, it's almost like the data is not valid anymore, because you've obviously changed some. You're going to have changed something else by then.
Yep.
And everything becomes a chain reaction. So when I talked earlier about the rapid iterative testing, what often happens is from testing day one to the second day, you make a change, and all of a sudden it exposes a different problem that you didn't have before.
Yeah.
And so, everything's a chain reaction from that perspective. So, it's just a really good methodology, whether we do it or somebody else does it, but it's a really good methodology to kind of ensure that you're on the right track.
Yeah. That experimentation, or trying something different, even if you don't have a test ready to run, just try something completely different, because if you're not testing, you're probably just wasting time just to do something. Test often and test fast, and you don't necessarily always have to show it to a live audience. It could be like a usability test, like you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Very cool. So now, as we iterate, we try to initially maybe fix the bugs, get our quick wins, try to accomplish a lot of those profitable tasks initially when we first start testing. But eventually, we start to get those law of diminishing returns. How have you seen companies move towards that local maximum where they just can't test any further, or do they go back to the usability testing to find other ideas? I know that's also a common question I get. What if I've run out of test ideas?
Well, for us, we're fortunate, because what often happens is they redesign the whole website, right? Somebody gets and says, hey, you know what, our website's a year old, we need to redo it. Mm-hmm. And so that just starts the cycle all over again, honestly, because somewhere there's a designer thinking they need to try something cool, and next thing you know, we've got good business for us. Yeah. And so it's been very rare in my experience of doing this, where you run out of things. Mm-hmm. Now, with that said, you'll often run out of things. There's scenarios where you run out of things that are more of the usability things, user experience things. And what you're left with are much larger, more business strategic decisions, whether it's pricing or product assortment or business policies. Certainly they affect the user experience, but they're certainly out of the control of the world we live in here.
Yeah, that makes sense. And let's talk about that ultimate redesign, because that's usually what we do. We do this, to use your phrase, rapid iterative testing. That's what we do for about 4 to 5 months before we do a redesign of a new site. We try to get those diminishing returns. We try to push the current layouts as much as we possibly can until they start to get too ugly. Even though they're converting well, sometimes they get too ugly. We're trying to put too much in there, and then we do the redesign. So is that process usually pretty common these days? It's good to hear more people doing that.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, your question broke up there. I apologize. I didn't hear that.
Do you see more people doing this iterative evolution of designing their site before doing the full redesign these days?
They do a lot. A lot of our customers, when they're starting to do a redesign, they almost always start with wanting to evaluate what exists today. Mm-hmm. It's one of many data they're going to work at, comparing their existing site to competitors, or even not even comparing their site, but just looking at what competitors are doing. In a lot of cases in the world we're in, certainly not redesigning the wheel is beneficial if it makes sense.
Yeah.
So we get a lot of different flavors of that. Mm-hmm. We also work with agencies that are responsible for the actual design, because one of the things you need to say, we don't design anything. I'm not a designer. I'm not a developer. We have no one on staff who can do that. And we think that's great. And I think it's an important lesson for those in the space, mm-hmm. To be able to have that unbiased, objective opinion, because no one typically will call their baby ugly. And we will if it is. And that's our job.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, now I imagine not only are you doing these usability tests for desktop and, for voice to customer, but obviously for mobile and tablets as well. So now, as the web has become more complex, I don't know if you're optimizing for the Apple iWatch or anything like that yet, but mobile and tablet are definitely here to stay. So, any advice as far as iterating in that way and segmenting out your traffic?
Yeah, it's important, and you mentioned complex, and you put omni-channel shopping in the e-commerce world on top of that, mm-hmm. and it's extremely complex. I think we're definitely moving into a stage where this idea of thinking about it from a device perspective or sort of silo of technology is going away, mm-hmm. and so it's a huge challenge. And so when you think about whether you think about mobile or tablet or store or anything, I think that the important thing is context, right? You have to make sure you understand the environment in which they're having that experience, right? Yeah. Even before you start thinking about, put this here or make sure you offer this on your mobile website or application. You have to know where they're using it. Are they sitting in line? Are they standing in line at Starbucks? Are they sitting waiting on their flight at the airport? Are they sitting on the couch in the evening? Because that's going to have a huge impact on what they expect mm-hmm. from the experience. Yeah. Then the other piece of that is when you talk about moving from channel to channel, is what did they do before they arrived with your interface or your experience? What are they doing and how successful are they? And if not successful, why? Mm-hmm. As I mentioned earlier, success really focus on whether we're doing qualitative or quantitative research. Mm-hmm. And then what are they going to do next? And so you really have to understand where your particular responsibility or channel fits in the ecosystem. Yeah. And we really recommend our clients do that type of research first before they start thinking about, all right, is this an effective, application or experience for a customer? Because if you don't know where it fits, then how are you supposed to know if it's going to be successful?
No, that's a good point. I was actually just on a consulting call this morning, and I was talking with a e-commerce company. In the industrial, the majority of their customers, what they figured out was that they're going to Home Depot, they're about to buy a product, and they don't know what to buy. Even if they're an advanced contractor or whatever it is, in this case, this particular item that they sell, they're not really sure what to buy. So they go and they Google that particular query at that time, and they were receiving something like 65% of Android devices. So if you could figure out what those triggers are, what people are going to ask for, then your customer service can answer those on the call, and you can be the solution between Home Depot and Amazon for your business, and be that alternative, be the solution for them. Just fill their needs of whatever device they're on, whatever scenario. But figure out what those triggers are that are to make them actually purchase at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other piece of this, and certainly it matters, is what's the implications of what they're doing. It has to align, obviously, with their business. Yeah. We've worked with customers. I'll give you one, for example. They were a discount variety store, and when they first launched they have a retail space. They also have their e-commerce site. When they first launched it, it was geared for business customers. They felt that was the only folks that would be coming. So not only was the taxonomy and the navigation and everything configured for the business customer, mm-hmm. but you could only buy in bulk, in pallets, in large quantities. Well, over the time, in the last couple of years, they started noticing that the trend was that it was really more consumers than business. And so they had to really step back and essentially not only redesign the site, but redesign the overall thinking around what the mission of that site was. And that changed not only the nomenclature and vocabulary being used, but even the fulfillment side of it and the quantities available for purchase. And so you're right, it's a really important thing to focus on.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, let's talk a little bit about you. Let's maybe mention how people can find out more about you, what your company offers, and so forth.
Yeah, so obviously I work at usabilitysciences.com, and that's where I still am, while I don't do as much research, I'm still a practitioner. I'm in a research project next week for a customer. We also, our blogs on usability, we have usability.com, which is our blog, where our focus there is really just to be a thought leader and provide insights from what we learn in our research. I also have spoken at several conferences. I try to stay pretty active on LinkedIn as well. And quite frankly, I love to just talk about ways to help our customers improve. I always tell them, look, I'm a salesperson. You don't have to be afraid to call me or email me and just throw a question off me. The landscape of not only research methodologies, but tools. There's been a significant growth in research tools in the marketplace for not only large companies to utilize, but even the independent designer, developer, researcher. And so I love talking about those tools and ways you can take advantage of it.
Yeah, there's not many people who have as much experience as in this as Scott. And if you want to check them out, make sure you visit their website at usabilitysciences.com. And his Twitter handle is at usability.com, DOTCOM, usability.com. What would be one thing that you would tell optimizers or website owners to really, take their conversion rates and their business to that next level?
It's I think a broader sort of thing than a tactical element right now. I'm a firm believer that we are moving into an experience economy. And experience is going to be the differentiator amongst your competitors. Mm-hmm. And so I think, for as long as I've been alive, you've always heard, we're user-centered, or, our focus is on the customer. And quite honestly, they really are. They really don't practice that. Yeah. And so I think from a cultural perspective, I think the time is coming where that's no longer a nice sort of approach. I think they have to practice it. Yeah. And so truly putting the user at the center. And that really, when you think about it from a practical standpoint, mm-hmm. It's putting user research in that critical path. And what I mean by that is far too often, there's a design process and they want to do user research, but it's always sitting on the outside, meaning, look, if there's not time, it's not going to happen. They're just going to keep going. Right. And the moment in time that it becomes critical path where you go from step one to user research and you don't go to the following step until that's done, I think only when companies realize that and they put that part of their thinking, their strategy from the top down, will they truly be able to distinguish themselves as a user-centered company. Yeah, very cool. And I think that and it's bigger than just a tactical element, right? It's changing a culture that may not exist today.
Yeah, that's true. Well, thanks a lot for your time, Scott.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for watching the Marketing Optimization Podcast with Alex Designs. Please remember to subscribe to all the videos in my YouTube channel. Thank you.